6:30 in the morning, Los Angeles was still half asleep beneath a thin silver mist that felt like the ocean's breath. And right in the middle of Terminal 5, at LAX, a humiliation disguised as procedure was about to begin. Jordan Ellis, 42 years old, a self-made billionaire and founder of Ellis Capital, walked toward the first-class check-in counter of Aurora Airways. His navy suit was perfectly tailored. His Italian leather shoes gleamed so brightly they caught the ceiling lights, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist glinted softly, as if whispering, "He doesn't belong in this line." But Karen Whitfield, the check-in agent, saw something else entirely. She looked up, momentarily stunned. A tall black man, dressed impeccably, standing at the first-class counter. She swallowed hard, masking her unease with a professional but icy tone. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket." Jordan raised an eyebrow slightly and slid his e-ticket across the counter. "The round trip to London, seat 2A. Karen picked it up, examining it as though she were investigating evidence in a criminal case. The computer screen's reflection danced in her glasses, cold and sterile, like a verdict waiting to be read. "The system is showing an irregular transaction," she said, her voice tight with forced composure. In plain English, it meant, someone like you couldn't possibly afford this ticket. Behind him, the terminal moved in its usual rhythm, the loudspeaker announcing flights, the wheels of suitcases rolling across the floor, and the laughter of travelers beginning their day. Yet around Jordan, the air grew still. He stood there in the vast space of Terminal 5, alone in the crowd, while the staff's glances brushed over him like he was a suspect. At the next counter, a white businessman in a wrinkled shirt was processed in 30 seconds, no questions, no doubts. Nearby, an elderly woman was upgraded with a bright smile and warm congratulations. Even a young couple whose credit card had just been declined twice was treated with patience and kindness. But Jordan, 3 minutes had already passed since he'd presented his documents, and Karen was still typing with the deliberate slowness of someone buying time. Then came Tom Bennett, the floor supervisor, a tall, broad man with the kind of serious face that suggested every decision he made carried the weight of national security. "Is there a problem, Karen?" he asked. She tilted her head toward him, speaking softly, but just loud enough for Jordan to hear. The system flagged a suspicious transaction. "I'm verifying it." Tom nodded and crossed his arms, the posture of authority guarded, defensive, the stance of someone blocking an exit. Jordan noticed everything. He'd read thousands of reports, attended hundreds of meetings about diversity and inclusion. Yet he knew better than anyone prejudice rarely shouted. It smiled, nodded, and said, "We're just following protocol." He took a deep breath. "May I ask what exactly seems to be the problem with my ticket?" His voice was calm and steady, the tone of a man who'd learned to maintain composure in rooms where power was never built for him. Karen glanced at Tom. Their eyes met briefly, a silent exchange, as if they both understood something that didn't need to be said. "Sir," she began, "this transaction shows an unusual payment pattern and flight route. According to our regulations, we have to run a fraud check." "A fraud check," Jordan repeated softly, the corner of his mouth curving ever so slightly. He reached into his pocket and drew out a card, an American Express Centurion, matte black and unmistakable. The kind of card most people had only heard rumors about. He placed it neatly on the counter beside his Ellis Capital ID and the email confirmation sent from the company's Platinum business account. "This is the corporate card, my identification, and the confirmation email," from 3 days ago. I can provide the transaction record if needed. Karen picked up each item carefully, inspecting them as if they might explode in her hands. Behind him, a middle-aged man lifted his phone and began recording. Another whispered, "What's happening? Is someone being arrested?" Jordan could feel their stares pricking against his skin, sharp, intrusive. This wasn't about a ticket anymore. It was a silent trial. Tom took half a step forward, his voice lower but firm with authority. "Sir, we'll need to conduct an independent verification. Please come with us to a private area to assist with the process." From a distance, 2 black-suited security officers started walking towards them. A chill ran down Jordan's spine, not from fear, but from recognition. He had seen this scene before, just with different scenery. In country clubs, in boardrooms, in fine restaurants. And now in the very place that should have greeted him with champagne and courtesy. Around him, phones were raised, cameras pointed an audience, watching the latest episode of Black Man in the Wrong Place. Karen typed a few more lines, then looked up, her voice suddenly louder, clear enough for half the terminal to hear. "Sir, we have reason to believe this ticket may be counterfeit." The words shattered the air like glass, breaking on marble. No one cared about the truth anymore. They only saw a black man being investigated. Jordan gave a faint nod, his gaze darkening. He didn't argue, he didn't shout. He simply murmured just loud enough for himself once again. Calmly, he gathered his documents and straightened his posture. His reflection on the glass wall behind the counter loomed tall and steady, a solitary figure anchored amid a sea of onlookers filming his humiliation. Karen swallowed hard, a flicker of uncertainty flashing across her chest, but she didn't stop. Tom gestured to the guards. In that moment, Jordan Ellis was no longer a passenger. He had been turned into a problem to be handled. He turned away, each step deliberate, and unhurried, his eyes fixed on the security area ahead, where a man's fate could be decided in the name of procedure. But beneath that silence, a storm was already forming. A storm that would sweep away every title, every nameplate, every hollow smile hidden behind the word policy. In 45 minutes, Aurora Airways would descend into chaos, and the man they had just humiliated was the one who held the strings to their destiny. The glass door of the secondary inspection room closed softly, sealing Jordan off from the outside world. No more announcements, no more rolling suitcases. Only the sterile air, the cold fluorescent lights, and 3 pairs of eyes studying him like a criminal, yet to confess. The temporary holding room of Aurora Airways, officially called the Verification Support Area, was nothing more than a narrow space with 2 plastic chairs, a cold metal table, and a small security camera fixed to the ceiling. It was the place where those labeled as problems sat in silence, waiting for the system to decide whether they were worthy of flying or not. Jordan Ellis took a seat, his hands clasped together. He could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his pulse, the kind of calm forged through 2 decades of fighting upstream against prejudice. The door opened with a click. Tom Bennett entered with Karen Whitfield, a thick folder in hand. "Mr. Ellis," Tom began, his tone carrying the false weight of authority. "We need you to provide additional information regarding how you purchased this ticket." Jordan lifted his gaze, his eyes calm and unwavering. "I've already presented everything required, my card, the confirmation email, my company ID. What more do you need?" Karen interjected, her voice soft, but laced with that ingrained doubt that never quite hid itself. "We're simply following procedure, sir. Your ticket shows some inconsistencies with standard formats. It could be a system error, But we need an independent verification. Independent verification, Jordan repeated, his smile thin. Who are you planning to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation? The air thickened. Karen looked at Tom, seeking support. Tom replied evenly. You understand this is a standard procedure for transactions with potential risk indicators. Risk, Jordan echoed his tone, cutting through the space. Or risk that doesn't look like it belongs in first class. For the first time, Karen faltered. She didn't respond. Jordan pulled out his phone and switched on the recorder. I just want documentation of this meeting, he said quietly. But something in his voice made them both hesitate. He looked directly into Tom's eyes. You know, in 20 years, I've seen every form of bias inside boardrooms, in banks, in private clubs. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone disguise it this elegantly as administrative procedure. Tom straightened, trying to regain control. Are you intentionally trying to cause tension here? Jordan raised an eyebrow. No. I'm simply documenting an event that 45 minutes from now you'll both wish had never happened. Karen froze. There was something in his tone, certainty power, the kind that didn't need to shout, that made her uneasy. But Tom crossed his arms again, forcing a smirk. You can intimidate someone else, but not us. The ticket's suspicious, end of story. I'll file the report, and security will escort you out. Jordan nodded slowly. Fine. But before I leave, I'd like to record your names. He pulled out his pen and typed deliberately into his phone. Karen Whitfield, first class desk attendant. Tom Bennett, regional security supervisor. Karen swallowed hard, her heartbeat quickening. She had never seen anyone so calm after being denied a flight. No anger, no blame, just an unshakable gaze that felt like it could see right through her. Thank you for your cooperation, Jordan said softly, giving a slight nod. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked out. As the door closed behind him, Karen slumped into her chair. Tom, she whispered, who do you think he really is? Probably some show-off. Tom scoffed. Rented suit, borrowed card. One of those guys who thinks he's somebody. But deep down, unease gnawed at him. There was something about that man, the way he spoke, the way he looked at them, that made Tom feel he'd just made a serious mistake. Outside, Jordan stepped back into Terminal 5. The noise had faded, replaced by the echo of an announcement. Passenger Ellis, please proceed to the security gate. He looked up at the display board and saw his flight had just switched to boarding. A faint smile curved his lips. He unlocked his phone. His contacts appeared names he only used in moments that required precision and power. David Carter, private investigator. Sarah Mitchell, civil rights attorney. Lisa Grant, executive assistant. Michael Reed, head of institutional investment. He tapped the first name. David, he said, his voice low and steady. I need you to compile a complete dossier on Aurora Airways, financial structure, discrimination, lawsuits, executive profiles, shareholder data. 20 minutes. Understood, David replied immediately. No questions asked. With Jordan Ellis, an order always carried the urgency of a national crisis. The second call. Sarah, he said quickly, prepare a lawsuit. I want your team at LAX within 45 minutes. The charge is systemic discrimination. List me as the plaintiff. Sarah paused for a moment. My God, what happened? Just a minor procedure. Jordan answered with a quiet smile, but one that will teach an entire corporation how to behave. The third call. Lisa, cancel London. Convene the board meeting at 2 this afternoon. Bring every document connected to Aurora shares, contracts, investment funds. I want it all on my desk by 1. Lisa didn't ask for clarification. Understood, Mr. Ellis. The final call. Michael Jordan said begin liquidating all Aurora holdings. Notify every fund that this is a direct order. And remind them reputation is a form of currency. Don't keep dirty stock in your portfolio. Are you sure? Michael asked, stunned. We hold 12%, I'm sure Jordan replied. We don't invest in prejudice. By the time the last call ended, morning sunlight had slanted through the glass, tracing a pale shimmer across his face. Outside, an Aurora Airways jet lifted into the sky, carrying the passengers he'd once intended to sit beside, while the airline that owned that plane had just thrown him out of his own first-class seat. Jordan slipped his phone into his pocket and walked slowly toward the parking lot. Every step carried the weight of a decision. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need a public scene. All he needed was to set in motion the gears of a system he had spent 20 years building. Meanwhile, in Aurora Airways' Manhattan headquarters, the first ripples of a financial storm were already appearing. An email alert from Goldman Sachs' credit limit review required for Aurora. A notification from the insurance firm emergency meeting requested regarding reputational risk. And the first tweet featuring a video of Jordan being stopped at the first-class counter had just begun to spread online. None of them knew that in 45 minutes, the name Jordan Ellis would become the nightmare Aurora Airways would never forget. Out in the vast parking lot, Jordan opened his car door and settled behind the wheel. In the rearview mirror, the reflection of a man once underestimated now held the switch to a coming earthquake. His eyes were cold but burning bright like steel in sunlight. He spoke softly, almost a whisper. All right. They wanted a lesson. I'll teach it. The morning in New York drifted by quietly. Sunlight glinted off the glass walls of the Aurora Airways tower, where on the 58th floor, the executive office buzzed with the familiar rhythm of keyboard clicks, ringing phones, and hurried meetings. No one inside knew that within minutes, the world they'd built would begin to collapse, floor by floor, layer by layer, pride by pride. On the massive walnut desk, Andrew McCall, the chief executive officer of Aurora Airways, sipped his first cup of coffee. At 55, his graying hair and calm demeanor gave him the confidence of a man who believed that any crisis could be solved with a meeting. But what was coming wasn't a crisis. It was judgment. 8:02 a.m. The phone on his desk flashed red. Chloe, his assistant, burst in without knocking her face pale. Mr. McCall, Goldman Sachs is on line 1. They want to renegotiate our credit line immediately. Andrew frowned and set his cup down. Renegotiate in the middle of the month. What's going on? I don't know, sir, but they said there's a severe reputational risk. He opened his mouth to ask more when an email popped up on his screen. The subject line read, Urgent Public Relations Incident, LAX Terminal 5. He clicked. A video was spreading online, filmed on a phone. It showed a black man in a tailored suit being stopped by Aurora Airways staff at the first-class counter, with security being called accused of having a fake ticket. Below it blazed the hashtags Aurora Bias and Flying While Black. Andrew froze. The video had already hit 200,000 views in less than half an hour. Comments poured in. Another racist airline, boycott Aurora. The door flew open again. Janet Whitfield, the chief financial officer, entered, clutching a thick folder. In her 50s, solidly built and sharp-eyed, she carried an air that balanced authority with panic. Andrew, we have a problem. Don't tell me it's your sister's doing, he half joked, half guessed. Janet stopped cold, her eyes wide. You already know. Andrew sighed. I just saw the clip. That's your employee, Janet, bit her lip. My younger sister. And yes, it's her. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock. Andrew leaned forward, palms on the desk. Janet, how bad is this? 3 banks just sent notices suspending our bridge loans. They said they're reassessing risk exposure. Our stock is down 12% in an hour. Before she finished, the door opened again. Mark Reynolds. Head of legal appeared with another stack of papers. We just received formal investigations from the NAACP, the Urban League, and 5 other civil rights organizations, he said, out of breath. They're alleging systemic discrimination. CNN is preparing coverage, and Twitter is exploding. Andrew ran a hand over his face. Dear God, all this over one ticket agent. No, Mark said sharply. Not just one. They've dug deeper. We've settled 23 similar cases quietly in the past 5 years. And now it's all coming out. 8:15 a.m. Another phone rang Andrew's personal cell. The caller ID flashed Richard Hayes, chairman of the board. Andrew, what the hell is going on? The stock's crashing reporters are calling non-stop. We're handling it, Andrew said, forcing calm. It's just a misunderstanding, a passenger who felt disrespected. A misunderstanding, Richard's voice flared. Do you have any idea who that passenger is? Who a long pause. Then Richard spoke each word, heavy as a hammer. Jordan Ellis, CEO of Ellis Capital, one of our largest shareholders. Andrew went still. What did you say? His company owns 12% of Aurora's shares, plus $500 million in corporate debt through its investment funds. Do you understand what that means? If they pull out, Aurora collapses. Andrew staggered to his feet, pacing behind his desk, sweat beading at his temples. No, that can't be. No one told me. He was thrown off our flight over a fake ticket. Richard's tone hardened. Not just thrown off, escorted out by security. And it's all over the internet. You have 30 minutes to call him. If you don't, I'll have the board's lawyers take over. 8:46. Andrew grabbed his phone and typed Jordan Ellis. The first page of search results was a wall of headlines and photos, Jordan smiling at global conferences surrounded by world leaders. Titles read, The Billionaire Behind Ellis. Capital $50 billion, under management operations in 12 countries, 18 subsidiaries. Beneath it, the newest headline glared, Breaking Aurora Airways, under fire for discrimination, incident involving major investor. His hands trembled. Richard's warning echoed in his mind. If they pull out, Aurora collapses. Andrew turned to Janet. Give me Ellis's number. Now. What are you going to do, Beg? He said. What else? The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. A voice came through calm, deep, controlled. Andrew McCall, I assume you've seen the video. Mr. Ellis, I'm deeply sorry. This was a terrible misunderstanding. We'll deal with the staff involved immediately, Jordan interrupted. You don't need to. I already have. Andrew froze. What do you mean? You might want to check Aurora's stock price. Andrew looked at the screen. The shares had dropped another 15%. Jordan's voice stayed calm, sharp as glass. Mr. McCall, you didn't just lose a passenger. You insulted a major shareholder, a financial partner, and ironically, the man who funded the aviation scholarship program for black students your company used for PR 6 months ago. Andrew stammered, We'll do everything we can to make this right. Whatever you ask, I don't need promises, Jordan said coldly. I need accountability. Silence filled the line. When Jordan spoke again, his tone was slow, deliberate, like a verdict. You had 3 chances to do the right thing. First, when your employee insulted me, you could have stopped it. Second, when security dragged me out, you could have called to apologize. Third, when the internet erupted, you could have spoken up. You missed all three. Mr. Ellis, please. No need for apologies. The market will speak for me. And the call ended. 9:10 a.m. Andrew stood by the window. The city outside still buzzed as if nothing had happened, but on the ticker board one line flashed in red like an open wound. Aurora Airways down 32%. Janet sank into her chair, eyes glazed. He's right, Andrew. This isn't an incident anymore. It's a sentence. Andrew didn't respond. He walked to the door, his fists clenched white. Outside, the sky was clear, the planes of Aurora still flying, but below them, an empire was in free fall. And in the silence of the 58th floor, one line hung in the air, echoing like thunder. They thought they were humiliating a man, but what they really did was bring down an empire. Morning on Wall Street had never been this chaotic. On the massive LED screens towering over the financial district, the words, "Aurora Airways down." 38% flashed like a bleeding wound amid a forest of green numbers. From Manhattan to Chicago, investment funds, banks, and financial media outlets had turned their cameras toward a single point of focus. Aurora was collapsing, and the cause was a discrimination scandal at LAX. On the 44th floor of Ellis Capital, the executive conference room blazed with light. No one raised their voice, yet the air was so electrified that a single tap on the table could have made everyone jump. Jordan Ellis stood by the window, a cold cup of coffee in his hand. Below him, people moved along the streets, calm and unaware that with a single command, he had erased $5 billion from the market in 4 hours. Behind him, his executive assistant Lisa Grant read the latest updates aloud. Aurora's stock has dropped 35% in 3 hours. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley have both downgraded their rating. The Federal Department of Transportation has launched a formal investigation. CNN, Reuters, and Bloomberg are all running the same headline, "Black Billionaire Shakes the Airline Industry." Jordan said nothing. He slowly set his cup down, his voice low and steady like tempered steel. "Bring me their internal reports, every lawsuit, every settlement. I want proof." Lisa nodded, handing him an iPad. The internal investigation from David Carter, a former FBI agent, was complete. What Jordan saw inside was chilling 23 discrimination lawsuits over the past 5 years, most quietly settled with non-disclosure clauses. An internal training document titled Passenger Risk Recognition, a coded policy that encouraged staff to act on prejudice disguised as procedure. Emails between regional directors that read, "Avoid upgrading passengers who don't align with the brand image." Jordan's expression didn't change as he scrolled through the files. He had long thought he was immune to offense, but seeing prejudice written into policy made something tighten inside him. Not anger, but a cold, precise resolve. "Lisa," he said, "prepare the press release announcing we're divesting all investments from Aurora, the entire 12% stake. Publish it at 3 this afternoon. Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Absolutely. And make the headline clear. Ellis Capital cuts all financial ties with Aurora Airways over systemic discrimination." Meanwhile, across town, Andrew McCall could barely breathe. The Aurora Airways executive floor looked like a battlefield, phones ringing non-stop, public relations, shouting legal advisors running from office to office. Online, the LAX video had reached 12 million views in 4 hours. A tweet from a major Hollywood actor read, If Jordan Ellis was treated like this, imagine what happens to ordinary people. Within minutes, Boycott Aurora became the #1 trend worldwide. We just lost 3 international travel contracts, the head of sales shouted. Insurance premiums are up 300%, the finance director replied. And the Department of Transportation just launched a full investigation, the legal chief added. Andrew slammed his hands on the table. Does anyone here have an emergency plan? No one answered. Only a young employee, trembling, spoke up softly. So Mr. Ellis just announced he's selling all his shares. The press is calling it the Ellis effect. Andrew's voice cracked as he shouted, "Oh my God," 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The statement from Ellis Capital went public. The market erupted. News outlets everywhere flashed the same headline: billionaire Jordan Ellis withdraws entire investment from Aurora Airways, accuses airline of systemic discrimination. Within 15 minutes, more than $2.3 billion in market value vanished. Pension funds, investment banks, and ETFs scrambled to dump Aurora stock, desperate to avoid what analysts were now calling ethical risk. At Aurora's headquarters, the Bloomberg terminal blinked non-stop, its red graph plunging straight down. Janet Whitfield, the CFO, sat frozen, her face drained of color. "Andrew," she whispered, "if we don't raise capital in 24 hours, the company will lose liquidity." Andrew looked around the room, faces pale, weary, broken. The empire, once praised for its professionalism, now lay in ashes, burned by its own arrogance. Across the city, in the top-floor office of Ellis Capital, Jordan stood silently before a screen showing a crimson graph falling like a stone into a canyon. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he simply watched in silence. Because he knew this wasn't revenge, it was a reckoning. His phone buzzed. It was Sarah Mitchell, his civil rights attorney. "Jordan, we've collected footage from 5 different angles and witness statements. Civil rights groups are preparing to file a class action lawsuit against Aurora. Do you want to be listed as the plaintiff?" Jordan paused, his voice calm. "No, I don't want this to be about me. Make it a class action suit. Let it stand for everyone who's ever been humiliated because of their skin color." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know you've just set a precedent, right? From now on, every corporation will have to consider moral risk the same way they consider financial risk." Jordan replied softly. "That's the point." That evening, CNBC aired a special broadcast, "The Fall of Aurora Airways: How One Man Changed Corporate America." The footage played in slow motion, Jordan Ellis walking calmly through the airport as security blocked his path. His face composed, his posture steady. The narrator's voice followed. It took only 45 minutes for a 60-year-old airline to lose nearly half its market value. The next image showed Andrew McCall leaving the Aurora headquarters, dodging reporters, his expression hollow like a man who had just received his sentence. That night in his Manhattan penthouse, Jordan sat alone by the window. The city lights reflected on his face, a blend of exhaustion and quiet resolve. He turned on the TV, his image filled every screen, news anchors, talk shows, social media feeds. Some called him a modern hero. Others called him the man who started the storm. But inside, he felt no triumph, only a question that lingered in the stillness. How many others have endured this without the power to fight back? He set his cup down and looked out at the skyline. The city never slept. And now it was no longer innocent. Tomorrow Aurora might fall completely. But what he had awakened, the awareness that prejudice has a price, that discrimination carries real financial risk, would remain. Far in the distance, the billboards of Times Square flashed the news: Aurora Airways stock down 41%. Ellis Capital confirms full divestment. Below it, another headline rolled across: Aurora bias reaches 50 million, mentions worldwide. The lights flickered in Jordan's eyes like stars burning in the night. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Don't call it revenge. Call it justice. The next morning, the Aurora Airways headquarters in Manhattan was surrounded by reporters. The glass doors were plastered with the logos of CNN, NBC, Bloomberg, and BBC. Every microphone thrust forward like a spear. Every question a cut into the already bleeding reputation of the airline that once prided itself on the slogan, "Fly with prestige." Inside the conference room on the 58th floor, Andrew McCall sat in silence, his tie-loosened eyes hollow from a sleepless night. Around the long mahogany table, the PR team argued in chaos. We need to issue a public apology immediately. If we admit fault, the shareholders will sue us. And if we stay silent, the market will bury us. 10 feet under, Andrew slammed the table. Enough! His voice thundered through the room. All night you've talked about PR and damage control. But does anyone here understand that we humiliated one of our largest shareholders? No one answered, because there was nothing left to defend. Across the city, in a sleek black limousine, Jordan Ellis sat in silence on his way to Aurora Tower. The morning light shimmered on the car's glass, casting a cold silver glow across his face. Beside him, Lisa Grant, his executive assistant, read the day's schedule aloud. 9:30 emergency meeting with Aurora's executive board. 11 o'clock CNN requests a live interview. This afternoon, the Department of Transportation will officially announce a discrimination investigation. Jordan didn't respond. His gaze followed the pedestrians outside the cab drivers, office, workers, students. Ordinary people, all of them anonymous, yet each could have lived through a smaller version of what he had endured. He spoke softly, his voice calm, almost like he was talking to himself. This isn't about me. It's about those who don't have a voice. Lisa nodded, but deep down she knew today's meeting wasn't just between a billionaire and a CEO. It was a confrontation between two worlds, the old order of power and the new demand for justice. 9:27 a.m. The limousine stopped in front of Aurora Tower. Jordan stepped out in a charcoal grey suit and a silver tie, his posture straight and sharp as steel. Reporters swarmed. Mr. Ellis, are you planning to sue Aurora? Do you want to see them bankrupt? Are you seeking revenge? Jordan stopped for 3 seconds, turned to face the cameras and spoke clearly, every word deliberate. This isn't revenge, he said. I just want a system that respects the people it's supposed to serve. Those words echoed across millions of screens that morning, becoming the most quoted statement of the year. Inside the boardroom, Andrew stood when Jordan entered. No one spoke for 10 full seconds, the silence thick enough to hear the ticking clock on the wall. Jordan set his briefcase down and took the seat at the head of the table, the same chair he once occupied as one of Aurora's largest investors. He looked around. 12 members of the board, each wearing a different expression, fear, guilt, or quiet despair. Andrew spoke first, his voice hoarse. Mr. Ellis, on behalf of the entire company, I want to express our deepest apologies for what happened. It was an individual mistake. It doesn't reflect Aurora's values. Jordan raised his eyes. An individual mistake. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, but the weight of it seemed to stop every breath in the room. Mr. McCall, I've read your internal emails. I've seen the directive that says, avoid upgrading passengers who don't fit the brand image. I've also seen the list of 23 quietly settled lawsuits. Do you still call that an individual mistake? Andrew said nothing. Jordan continued each word, deliberate, sharp as a blade. You didn't just insult me. You insulted an entire community and thought you could hide it behind the word procedure. One board member finally spoke up, voice trembling. We're prepared to do whatever it takes to make this right. Jordan turned to him, his eyes cold. Whatever it takes. He paused, then said, Then I have 3 conditions. First, immediate termination of every individual involved from the ticket counter to their direct supervisors. Second, a full audit of your recruitment, training, and internal complaint systems, with all findings made public within 30 days. Third, the creation of an aviation equality fund financed by Aurora, but overseen by an independent board to provide scholarships for Black and female students pursuing aviation careers. He looked directly at Andrew, his voice unwavering. This isn't a choice. It's your last chance to prove Aurora deserves to exist. The room fell silent. The only sound was Andrew's heavy breathing. At last, he nodded slowly. I agree. To all of it. Jordan stood. Good. He picked up his briefcase, ready to leave, but paused at the door. His voice dropped calm, yet commanding. Mr. McCall, I don't need Aurora to collapse. I need Aurora to change. But remember this. If anyone in your company ever again believes that the color of someone's skin determines their worth, I won't be giving another warning. The door closed behind him. Inside, no one spoke. Andrew sank into his chair, his hands trembling. Across the table, Janet Whitfield, who had just lost her sister in the fallout, bowed her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. He could have destroyed us, she whispered. But he chose to let us live. Andrew exhaled heavily. No, he said quietly. He didn't just let us live. He forced us to earn the right to exist. Outside, Jordan walked into a storm of cameras. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. He didn't flinch. He didn't hide. A reporter called out, Mr. Ellis, how did the meeting go? Jordan stopped, offering a faint, calm smile. Change begins in the places that once refused it. Then he walked away. Above him, an Aurora jet soared into the sky, its engines roaring like the drumbeat marking the end of an old era. Jordan looked up, not with anger, but with a quiet, steady resolve. He knew he had not won with power, but with dignity held to the very end. That evening, the nightly news anchor's voice carried the story to every living room. Today, Jordan Ellis, the black billionaire, denied a first-class seat, forced Aurora Airways to commit to a full-scale reform. Analysts are calling it the Ellis moment, when one man's dignity became the catalyst for change across an entire industry. Somewhere in the city, in a dim apartment, Karen Whitfield sat watching the broadcast. Her hands trembled. She replayed Jordan's words on TV. This isn't revenge. I just want a system that respects the people it serves. And for the first time she cried, not because she'd been fired, but because she finally understood that one sentence could save the world from its own blindness. 3 weeks after the incident, America no longer spoke of Aurora Airways as an airline. People spoke of it as a living lesson about power ethics and consequence. From the halls of Congress to the corner coffee shops, the name Jordan Ellis had become a symbol of something long forgotten, that fairness is not a privilege, it is an obligation. On CNN's morning broadcast, the anchor began. Since the Aurora incident, major airlines have announced internal reform programs. The Department of Transportation has called for an emergency hearing, and for the first time, an Aviation Equality Act is being drafted with direct consultation from the man once humiliated at a first-class counter, Jordan Ellis. In Washington, D.C., the Capitol glowed under the lights as dozens of reporters gathered outside the chamber. On the hearing floor, Jordan walked forward, slowly, steadily, like a man who knew he no longer spoke for himself, but for millions who had been judged by a glance. Across from him sat Senator Patricia Walker, chair of the Commerce Committee. "Mr. Ellis," she began, "please recount the incident from your perspective." Jordan held the microphone, his voice steady and clear, neither bitter nor angry, only carrying the weight of truth. "What happened to me at LAX," he said, "was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of a corporate culture fed by bias and legalized through the language of procedure. I wasn't the first, I was simply the only one with enough power to make the system see itself." Applause erupted across the chamber. Senator Walker nodded. "Mr. Ellis, if you could make one recommendation to prevent this from happening again, what would it be?" Jordan paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "We need laws," he said. "Not ethical memos, not superficial training sessions. We need policies with teeth so that any company that puts profit above human dignity will pay the price." Behind him, legislators exchanged looks, their aides scribbling notes. A bill was being born that very moment, the Aviation Equality Act. That same day at Aurora's headquarters, the old advertisements were torn down. The slogan, "Fly with Prestige," was replaced with a new one, "Fly with Respect." Andrew McCall was no longer the CEO. He had resigned, leaving the building quietly. No escorts, no applause, only the stares of employees mixed with regret and judgment. His successor, Evelyn Ross, the company's first female CEO, stepped in with an impossible mission: to rebuild trust. Her first email to every employee read, "We cannot erase what happened, but we can ensure it never happens again." From today onward, respect is not a concept, it is procedure. At Ellis Capital, Jordan was flooded with invitations for partnerships, interviews, and speaking engagements. He declined most of them. He had no interest in becoming a media hero. What he wanted was real change. Lisa Grant read aloud the draft of the new bill. Section 3, Clause 5. Every airline shall conduct mandatory anti-bias training annually for all employees with special focus on customer-facing positions. Any confirmed violation shall incur a financial penalty equivalent to 2% of the company's previous year's revenue. Jordan nodded. "Add one more thing," he said. "I want the Aviation Equality Fund we created to become a government partner. They can manage the scholarship programs and oversee compliance with this act." Lisa smiled faintly. "You're rewriting the entire aviation industry, Jordan." He answered calmly, "No, I'm just correcting the way people see each other." One evening, Jordan accepted an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School. The auditorium was packed, students filling every seat and lining the aisles. A student stood and asked, "Sir, do you regret bringing down an entire corporation?" Jordan thought for a moment. "No, I didn't bring it down. I simply withdrew support it no longer deserved." If a company's survival depends on society's blindness, then its collapse isn't a tragedy, it's overdue justice. The hall fell silent. Then one person stood to applaud, followed by hundreds, then thousands. But Jordan didn't look up. His eyes were on his hands, where the light reflected off an old wedding band, a keepsake from the wife who once told him, "Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins with how we treat others every day." 3 months later, the Aviation Equality Act passed Congress with 92 votes in favor. The president signed it into law in a ceremony attended by Jordan Ellis, now hailed by the media as the architect of equality in the skies. Other airlines soon followed suit, Delta, United, American, all launching their zero-bias policy. Within 6 months, reports of discrimination dropped by 60%. In aviation schools, hundreds of Black, Latin, and Asian students received scholarships from the Aviation Equality Fund. At the bottom of every graduation certificate, a small line was engraved, dedicated to the lesson of Jordan Ellis. Dignity is not negotiable. Meanwhile, Karen Whitfield, the former ticket agent at the center of the LAX incident, lived quietly in the suburbs of Chicago. She found work at a small regional airline in the lowest position, check-in clerk. Every day, as she handed out boarding passes, she said the same words, gentle but sincere. "Thank you, and have a safe flight." No more suspicion, no more judgment in her eyes. One evening she wrote a letter to Jordan. "Dear Mr. Ellis, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but because of you, I've learned that every time I smile at a passenger, I'm giving back a piece of what I once took away. Thank you for not destroying me, but choosing instead to let me become better." Jordan read the letter in silence. He didn't reply. But the next morning he signed off on a new grant for a program called Re-Empower, designed to retrain workers dismissed for professional misconduct. He told Lisa, "Forgiveness doesn't erase mistakes. It turns pain into the seed of change." Outside his window, the sunset bathed the landing planes in gold. A new world was taking shape, not perfect, but self-aware. And at its center stood the man who was once stopped at a first-class counter, now standing tall beneath the open sky, quietly reminding humanity of one simple truth: respect costs nothing, but without it, we can lose everything. 1 year after the LAX incident, the world was no longer the same. It was no longer the age of signs that said, "We apologize for the inconvenience," but the era of accountability and transparency. And the name Jordan Ellis, once a man questioned for the color of his skin, was now etched onto the Wall of Honor at the Aviation Diversity Council, celebrated as the symbol of an industry awakened. This morning, New York was clear. The sky stretched wide sunlight glinting off towers of glass and steel. On the 72nd floor of the Ellis Capitol Tower, Jordan stood by the window, watching Aurora aircraft glide through the clouds. Each had been repainted with new colors, and beneath every wing, small but visible to all, were the words, "Equality takes flight." He smiled, not the smile of victory, but the quiet expression of a man who had walked through a storm and seen the world emerge brighter, not because of power, but because of truth. Behind him, Lisa Grant entered, holding a folder. "Do you know," she said softly today, "marks exactly 1 year since the Aurora incident. Dozens of airlines are launching Year of Change campaigns inspired by you." Jordan turned his eyes kind, but distant. "They don't need to be inspired by me, Lisa. They just need to learn how to see people as people." She smiled and placed the folder on his desk. "This is the annual report from the Aviation Equality Fund. We've granted over 800 scholarships, opened 6 training centers, and launched 12 diversity management programs. The most impressive part, 60% of new pilot trainees are women or people of color." Jordan stood still for a moment. A year ago, all he wanted was to prove that fairness had economic value. Now it had become a legacy, a movement that no longer needed his name to keep moving forward. At that same time, at the Global Equality Summit in Geneva, a slide appeared on the massive screen The Ellis Effect, a case study on ethical power. Experts discussed how one individual had forced an entire system to change not through political authority, but through unwavering integrity. Professor Hannah Lee addressed the crowd. Jordan Ellis proved that ethics, when paired with strategy, is not merely an ideal, but an economic force. He didn't destroy Aurora. He redefined what it means for a company to exist. The speech was later published in the Harvard Business Review opening, with the line, "Markets can price stocks, but only humanity can price dignity." Meanwhile, in Chicago, a woman stood in front of a small classroom inside an aviation equality training center. It was Karen Whitfield. She wore a simple blouse, her hair neatly tied, her eyes warm and steady. In front of her sat 20 new trainees, former service workers beginning retraining. "Do you know," she began, her voice trembling slightly a year ago, "I was proof of how prejudice could destroy a life and an entire company." She paused, scanning the room. "But today I'm here to tell you that change is real. I once hurt a man I didn't know was quietly changing the world. And he didn't destroy me. He let me learn." The room fell silent. One trainee raised a hand. "Are you ever afraid of making mistakes now?" Karen smiled gently. "Yes, but I've learned that fear of being wrong is the beginning of being right." At the same time, in Washington, D.C., Senator Patricia Walker stood before the cameras. After 1 year of enforcement, the Aviation Equality Act has surpassed every expectation. Discrimination complaints are down 70%, and workplace diversity in aviation has nearly doubled. But the greatest achievement isn't in the numbers, it's in how we've begun to listen to one another. A reporter called out, "Senator, if you could describe Jordan Ellis in one word, what would it be?" She smiled. "Steadfast. Because only the steadfast have the courage to use power, to build, not to retaliate." That afternoon, Jordan flew to Washington to attend the 1-year commemoration ceremony. The Grand Hall was filled with senators, airline executives, scholarship recipients, and the same journalists who had covered the Aurora scandal a year earlier. When Jordan stepped onto the stage, the entire audience rose to their feet. The lights shone on him, like they would on a figure carved into history. But he simply raised a hand and said softly, "Please sit down." His voice carried through the hall, calm but powerful. "Thank you." A year ago, I walked away from a first-class counter, holding a ticket that someone called fake. Today I stand here, not to recount that humiliation, but to remind us all, never let one person's bias become the policy of an entire system. The applause that followed sounded like the heartbeat of the room. After the ceremony, Jordan stood alone in the corridor. A young black woman approached her badge reading, "Cadet Pilot, Aurora Airways." "Mr. Ellis," she said shyly, "thanks to your foundation's scholarship, I was able to study aviation." "I just wanted to say, thank you for not giving up when everyone wanted you to stay silent." Jordan smiled, pride glowing quietly in his eyes. "No," he said, "it's because of you that I couldn't stay silent." Night fell. The city shimmered with light. Jordan returned to his office, sitting by the window overlooking the Hudson River. Lisa entered quietly. "You should get some rest," she said. "You have another conference tomorrow." He shook his head. "Not yet. There's something I need to finish." On his desk, he opened his laptop and began typing the first lines of the book he had long promised himself he would write, "The Cost of Dignity." He wrote slowly, deliberately. "I don't want anyone to trade their equality for humiliation. I only want the world to understand that respect doesn't need permission. It only needs choice. The night breeze swept through the open window, carrying the faint sound of airplanes crossing the sky, reminding him that true legacy isn't measured by fame, but by the quiet moments that changed the world. Far above, an Aurora aircraft glided across the night sky, its lights trailing like a falling star, and in the cockpit, a young female pilot smiled, touching the emblem on her uniform, Aviation Equality, in honor of Jordan Ellis. Among the vast sea of clouds that legacy continued to soar, not powered by engines alone, but by the belief that every human being deserves to be seen through the eyes of fairness. 1 year after the Aviation Equality Act was born, people began calling it by another name, the Ellis effect. Not just because one man had changed the entire American aviation industry, but because that effect spread beyond borders, beyond the confines of first-class seats, to reshape the very way the world defined justice. From Tokyo to London, from Johannesburg to Toronto, airlines, banks, and multinational corporations began adopting a new concept in their business strategies: ethical capital. Investors no longer asked, what were the quarterly profits? They now asked, did you earn those profits while respecting people? In Zurich, Switzerland, at the annual World Economic Forum, Jordan Ellis was invited as the keynote speaker. The hall glowed under pristine white light as hundreds of CEOs, politicians, and scholars from around the globe sat in silence, waiting. Jordan walked to the podium without notes. Behind him, the screen displayed a single sentence: "Profit without principle is just polished destruction." He began to speak slow and deliberate, his voice deep and steady, like molten steel flowing through the room. The way we treat the powerless within our organizations is the way the world will one day treat us. If a company can close its eyes to injustice, then sooner or later, the market will close its eyes to their stock. The room fell silent. Then one person clapped, then another, until the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause lasted more than 2 minutes, not because they agreed, but because they had been awakened. Meanwhile, in New York, Lisa Grant, who had worked beside Jordan for more than a decade, was leading a new project called the Ellis Index. It was the first global rating system designed to measure a company's ethical transparency, ranking corporations based on equality, human rights, and social fairness. At the press conference, Lisa announced the market already has indexes for profit, risk, and growth, but it's time we had one for human dignity. The media called it Ellis Capital's second revolution. Major investment funds began requiring companies to meet a minimum Ellis Index score before they could qualify for funding. Within 6 months, more than 180 multinational corporations declared internal reforms to meet the new standard. In an exclusive interview, the Financial Times asked Jordan, "Do you believe justice and business can truly coexist?" He looked straight into the camera and replied, "Not only can they must. Justice doesn't kill profit. It makes profit sustainable. If ethics aren't built into your strategy, crisis will be built into your future." That quote appeared bold on the magazine's cover and soon became a slogan adopted by companies worldwide. In London, the European Transport Commission called an emergency session. European airlines announced that they would replicate the US Aviation Equality Fund model, establishing the European Equity Fund, sponsored by Aurora Airways and guided by Jordan Ellis as honorary advisor. Aurora's new CEO, Evelyn Ross, stood before the cameras and said, "A year ago we were nearly erased. But the very man we wronged saved us not by seeking revenge, but by choosing reform. From now on, Aurora commits 3% of its annual profits to advancing equality in aviation. Behind the stage, Jordan stood quietly, making no speech. He simply smiled as the new slogan appeared on the screen. No passenger left unseen. But the Ellis effect did not stop there. 3 months later, the United Nations officially added the term ethical resilience to its Global Development Report. Dozens of nations began including the Aurora case as a teaching example in courses on public policy, corporate law, and leadership. In Singapore, a business school displayed a massive poster of Jordan Ellis with the quote, "Power reveals character, but how you use it defines history." At 43 years old, Jordan Ellis was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize not because he built an empire, but because he rebuilt faith that the world could be just and still thrive. That evening in his high-rise apartment, Jordan sat by the window, a letter from the Norwegian Nobel Committee resting on the table before him. Lisa entered softly and asked, "Are you going to accept it?" Jordan smiled, his eyes distant. "I didn't do this for a medal. If they want to honor me, let them honor those who no longer fear speaking out when they're treated unfairly. Honor the everyday passengers because they're the ones who truly made change happen." The next day, he flew to Oslo not to receive an award, but to speak at the Global Forum on Economic Equality. On stage, he shared a simple story. "A year ago, I was questioned because my skin was darker than others standing in the first-class line. But I didn't use my power to reclaim a seat. I used it to help build a world where no one has to prove they deserve respect." The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered, cameras flashed, but Jordan simply bowed his head and added softly, "Don't remember my name. Remember this, 45 minutes used the right way can change an entire industry, even humanity itself." Meanwhile, in Los Angeles at LAX, the place where it all began, the airport unveiled the Ellis Lounge, a new space for elderly passengers, people with disabilities, and students on aviation equality scholarships. At the entrance, a bronze plaque read, "At this very terminal, justice took off." A young African-American boy looked up and asked his mother, "Mom, who's Jordan Ellis?" She smiled. "He's the man who taught the world that you don't need permission to be respected." Across the ocean aboard a plane bound for New York, Jordan Ellis sat by the window, gazing at the rolling white clouds bathed in golden sunset. In that quiet moment, he understood justice isn't a destination. It's a journey. A journey that anyone, no matter their place in the world, can begin with one simple decision: to do what is right. 3 years after the LAX incident, the world of aviation was no longer the same. Across the skies, planes bearing the words, "Fly with respect," stretched their wings over oceans, carrying a promise etched into the clouds. At every major airport from LAX to Heathrow, passengers now saw new signs that read, "Dignity first, human dignity comes first." That slogan was not born from any marketing campaign, but from a single moment, one man, and 45 fateful minutes that changed everything. In New York, inside a small classroom for the Leadership and Ethics program, students watched an old video of Jordan Ellis being stopped at the first-class counter. A young student raised his hand and asked Professor, he had the power to strike back. Why did he choose the harder, longer path instead? The professor smiled. Because people only change their behavior when they are enlightened, not when they are crushed. That lesson spread far beyond the classroom walls. Business schools, law programs, and media academies all included the Ellis case in their curriculum, proof that ethics is not the appendix of business, but the core of survival itself. In Geneva, the United Nations adopted a new resolution, the Ethical Governance Charter. The document, inspired directly by the Aurora case, required member nations to implement ethical standards across recruitment, public service, and private investment. The Secretary-General addressed the Assembly. We once believed respect was a virtue, but today it is energy. A society without respect is a society without the fuel to grow. The hall erupted in applause. Among the invited guests, Jordan Ellis sat quietly, his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on the flags waving above. Meanwhile, Aurora Airways, the airline once at the center of the storm, was now praised as a global model of reform. Evelyn Ross, the company's CEO, spoke at the anniversary of their restructuring. We once hit rock bottom, but from that very bottom, we learned how to take off again with respect. Passenger satisfaction reached the highest level in the company's history. Every employee was now required to complete the Empathy Flight program before working with customers. In the training room, Jordan Ellis's image appeared on the screen. He didn't talk about success. He said only one thing: every ticket you hold is a promise. Keep that promise by seeing the person before you see the ticket. That night, Jordan returned to his old apartment in Manhattan. The city was still loud and radiant as always. He opened the window, and the night wind carried a familiar sound, the distant hum of airplanes taking off, blending with the heartbeat of a city that had finally learned to love justice without shouting it aloud. On his desk lay the final proof of his book, The Cost of Dignity. On the last page he had written, "If a system can change in just 45 minutes, then maybe what the world needs is not miracles, but people brave enough to do the right thing in the wrong moment." Jordan set his pen down and smiled softly. In the distance, the New York sky lit up with the streak of a departing plane. He watched it, his gaze calm and warm, as if seeing the man he once was, someone who had been doubted, now remembered not for his power, but for how he used it. And the world, after 3 years, had finally learned a truth that seemed the simplest of all. When people learn to respect one another, every flight, no matter how short or long, becomes a journey toward freedom. 10 years after the LAX incident, the world had entered a new era, an age where ethics was no longer a slogan, but a system of operation. Yet in a quiet corner of New York, the man who started it all lived simply like a river that had already fulfilled its purpose. Jordan Ellis, now in his early 50s, his hair streaked with silver, but his eyes still bright, spent most of his time teaching not at grand conferences, but in small classrooms filled with students and young entrepreneurs. He no longer spoke about stocks, investments, or power. He spoke only about one seemingly simple idea: the power of 45 minutes. One autumn afternoon at Columbia University, Jordan stepped onto the stage. The lecture hall fell silent. On the board, he wrote 3 words: dignity, discipline, decision. He turned to the students and said, "You know, the day I was stopped at that first class counter, I had every reason to be angry. But I realized that if I chose anger, I would only defeat one person. If I chose discipline, I could change an entire system." He paused, his gaze steady on the hundreds of young eyes focused on him. We can't control how others see us, but we can always control how we respond. And sometimes just one right response in 45 minutes can redefine a generation. Applause filled the hall, not loud or chaotic, but deep and reverent. In the back row, a young white woman stood up. "Mr. Ellis," she said softly, "I'm the granddaughter of Karen Whitfield. My grandmother still talks about you, about how you chose forgiveness instead of destruction. She says you taught her the meaning of one word, second chance." Jordan stood still. For a moment, memories flooded back the cold counter, the suspicious stares, the silence that once felt like a verdict. He nodded gently, his voice low and filled with emotion. "Tell your grandmother I didn't forgive her because I'm kind. I forgave her because I believe that if no one is allowed to learn again, the world will never change." The girl smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. The hall fell silent once more. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind, born of respect. The next day, the New York Times ran a headline, "Jordan Ellis, the man who taught the world that justice needs no power, only courage." During an interview, a journalist asked, "Do you ever think about that day? If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" Jordan smiled, his gaze distant. "No. I would still stand still. I would still say little. And I would still make those 4 phone calls, because without that day, the world might never have learned that dignity has its own market value." That evening he returned to his high-rise apartment. Outside, the city glittered as planes from Aurora Airways lined the sky, their lights tracing faint trails across the dark. A glowing phrase, written in the air, "Respect lives here." Jordan stood by the window, holding a cup of hot tea. He thought of the thousands of students, the young people now living in a world where they no longer had to prove they were worthy of respect. A soft smile curved his lips, pride glowing gently in his eyes. In the small notebook he always carried, there was an old line. The ink faded with time. Every great change begins with a moment when someone decides, "I will not stay silent." Jordan closed the notebook and looked up at the night sky. A shooting star streaked across the darkness, burning bright before fading away. And he knew that light, like those 45 fateful minutes long ago, would continue to guide generations of people who believed that justice is not a miracle, but the result of courage at the right moment. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, the journey of Jordan Ellis is not just a story about justice, but a testament that true strength does not lie in responding with power, but in the ability to turn pain into transformation. He did not fight to reclaim a first-class seat. He made the entire world relearn how to see one another through respect. And that is his greatest legacy, turning a moment of injustice into a global lesson on human dignity. If you believe the world needs more people who dare to stand up for what is right, like this video, to spread that message, subscribe so you don't miss more stories where humanity is tested by power, and comment below with the phrase that reflects your faith in the strength of the human spirit. Hold your dignity.